Welcome to the Independence by Design podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a business owner and ways to get unstuck from the day-to-day so we can design a business that gives us a life of independence. Have you ever been listening to a podcast, maybe like mine, or reading a piece of content or talking to someone and thinking to yourself, does this information even pertain to me and my situation, my size of company, or the stage that I'm in? Well, I can tell you what, you're probably like a lot of people. And that's one of the efforts that I've been having with this podcast. But I was recently on a panel with BizVal. It was hosted by Kyle and Graham, and I was accompanied by a few other advisors and people. And I got into this productive debate with a guy named Mike Finger, who I respect the hell out of. And we're having round two on today's podcast because we really focus in on like, who are we talking to? And his argument is that 98% of companies are below $1 million in revenue, and things like ESOPs, free cash flow owners distributions, and capital allocation just don't pertain to them. Private equity, because they're just not big enough. And that's 98% of the market, which in his words is the whole market. I have no disagreement there, but then there's certain things that also are very obscure for the people that are in the 2%, which are the people that I work with, where they actually have enough of a resource or an infrastructure of their company where they can actually invest in the operations to decouple themselves from their job and then sit in the boardroom and actually capital allocate, where then ownership distribution forecasting and private equity and ESOPs and phantom stock and all the stuff that I talk about is extremely relevant. And in both camps, the amount of propaganda, misinformation is abundant, and I think everybody gets lost in the noise. And so Mike and I are both coming at this conversation from our lens of where we're coming at it, where I'm coming at it from the 2%, Mike's coming at it for the 98%, and what information is relevant. And I think this whole word exit planning is super dysfunctional. And Mike is not an exit planner. He calls it exit readiness. I think it's a lot of play on words, as you'll hear me talk about. But I think that this is a necessary conversation that should exist in the marketplace to figure out, where are you? What information is relevant to you? What should you be thinking about? And most importantly, where should you spend your time and energy, and what would the return be from cash flow or wealth? Mike and I are both talking about different implications of that based on the 2% or the 98%. So I really think you're going to enjoy this. The reason we decided to have a round two is because everybody said that Ryan and Mike's banter back and forth was very helpful for them. So I said, all right, let's give ourselves 2 hours to fully unpack the macroeconomics, the landscape, the demographics, the size of companies, so that way we can get into the nitty gritty. And I think we accomplished that. Big thanks to Kyle and Graham from BizVal. They do a great job at making sure that Mike and I are staying on track. Everybody's spoken for, and it was super fun to do this with someone like Mike, who we both have respect for each other. I guess I'm claiming that he has respect for me, but I really enjoyed the conversation. I respect him. I respect the unapologetically small business that lens that he has. And I thought it was a very well thought through conversation. So if you want to go check out very detailed material on business valuations, I've got a newsletter out. I'm continuing to launch whiteboard videos where I'm teaching about these business valuation concepts. Go check it on the newsletter tab on my website, ryantansom.com. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this conversation.
Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. A few weeks ago, we held a podcast, or a webinar, should I say, where we unpacked the BizVal 2025 SMB report. And we were really fortunate on that panel to have Ryan Tansom and Mike Finger join us on that panel. And in that conversation, we really got into some raw discussion around the state of SMB businesses in the US in 2025. And one of the things that came up in that discussion was, this definition of what an SMB is. Are we talking sub $1 million businesses? Are we talking, $20 to $50 million businesses? And feedback from our listeners and our audience was like, hey guys, this is something we really need to unpack a little bit deeper. So today I'm joined by my co-hosts, friends, colleagues, Mike and Ryan, and obviously Kyle from BizVal. So guys, maybe you want to do a quick intro, and then we can get into the meat of today's discussion.
Go for it, Mike.
Thank you, sir. Mike Finger. I run a business called Exit Oasis, where I help small business owners prepare their business for sale. I'm an 8-time owner, exited successfully 4 times, failed twice, and still own 2 small businesses. So that's me in a nutshell.
Ryan Tansom. I've got a ownership coaching program called Independence by Design, and I help middle market companies try to extract themselves from the operations into the boardroom so they can become more of a capital allocator and create options as an owner of a company. I got here through probably similar to you, Mike, is a lot of hard work and a lot of failed attempts. I sold a family business for 8 figures in 2014 after gutting the company. Had a lot of regrets. I read Bo Burlingham's book, Finish Big, and sent me on a decades-long journey with the podcast and 3 different companies, telling me to figure out what I would have done differently. And what I realized is that small middle market companies, which we're going to get into the definitions there of, we started our companies for independence. A lot of times we get stuck in this owner operator trap where it's our job, but it's our asset, and our time, cash flow, and wealth are all interconnected. And there was no through line on how to actually get that independence other than looking at arbitrary growth and net income. And so the framework I put together is the ownership playbook that complements systems like EOS, scaling up, great game for the operations. This is just for the ownership.
Cool. Thanks.
Awesome. Carl, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So Carl McCulloch, I'm the Vice President of BizVel for the US markets. Background, started as a trader, worked in global macros, very heavy focus on risk, geopolitical risk, and then worked for a small business before joining BizVel.
Fantastic. Well, guys, I'm not going to introduce myself. I mean, most of you, hopefully there's a new audience listening to this, but I'm the founder of BizVel, and, we're really passionate about empowering small business owners, private company owners to make better decisions for themselves, whether that's a sale, whether it's staying in the business, but really unlocking and understanding value, and then, making the right choices so that they can, get a better outcome from their business. So I think let's dive into sort of the context for today, and I'm going to start with some data, and Ryan and Mike, I'm going to ask you to chip in a little bit. But, if one looks at, corporate filings, and I'm going back a few years in terms of the IRS, there are about 7 million corporate returns filed in the US. And 75% of those were under 1 million in receipts. Between 1 and 5 million, about 1 million returns. And, under 5 million turnover, let's call it that, is 6.2 million returns. So almost 90% of all corporate filings in the US are actually, I guess, what we would call really small businesses. So the context of this is when we talk about SMBs, we talk mid-market, is there a difference between, a sub $5 million or even a sub $1 million business versus a 20 to 30 to $50 million business? And, Ryan, I know you've also done quite a lot of research in this space, and Mike, as have you, let's just talk some of the numbers first. And then maybe each of you can kind of introduce kind of where you sit in that spectrum and what your focus is.
Love it. Mike, what we were saying earlier before we hit record, I'll give the data that I think both you and I can synthesize and calibrate. I'll let you then explain how you're attacking the market or where you're coming from it, and then I'll do that. Because I think what we were saying before we hit record is we want to, for the audience here, get to what are the implications if this is what we see to be true, right? Because I think that's where I think was really fun is about the conversation. We're trying to get to the truth, and I'm really excited for this conversation because I think all of us, that's what we're all doing, and I'm excited for the conversation for that. So like the data that I'm going to walk through, and then after Mike goes, I'll explain how I've decided to deal with this data for my own practice and for my own mission to help small business owners, which I think that's why we're all here, is we have that in common. I got this, I synthesized this data from a couple of my other companies over the last decade of I was in some investment management 10 years ago. I had a couple consulting practices that did the value opportunity profile, the value builder system, exit planning, had a fractional CFO business that had hundreds of company financial exposures. And so it seems to me that these numbers seem to be true with a margin of error. And so where I'm getting these from is Ken Sangenario, who's the founder of the Value Opportunity Profile. He synthesized a bunch of data from the U.S. Census Bureau and the labor statistics, and and maybe it seems to hone in right around, Graham, what you're saying, where there's 27 million privately held entities in the US.
Yeah.
And those are privately held, right? So they employ around 150 to 160 million Americans. So like why I think we're all here is like 78% of the labor force is owned by, or is underneath the small businesses, not Amazon, not JP Morgan, which is why we're so passionate about this. Of those 27 million, 21 million have no employees. So they're like literally a solopreneur. They've got whatever, they're 1099. So that's around 6 million employer-led businesses. There's only around 21 to 25,000 that are above 100 million. And that's like to the right of the decimal point of percentages of how many people are above 100 million. I just did a Visit presentation last week too. Is everybody wants to be 100 million. It's like, well, of course, but like it's the implications of that are you are literally to the right of the decimal point. Between 5 million and 100 million, I'm sorry, let me back up. The people that work for 100 million, it's around 56 million Americans. So they have a large percentage, of that employment base. And again, this math might not reconcile 100%, but then between 5 million and 100 million, it's around 350 to 380,000 companies that employ around 35 million Americans. And that is around 300, like 350 to 380,000 companies. And then the rest of the 5.6 to, up to 6 million, like you said, Graham, have under 5 million in revenue. And like the way my brain applies like thoughts on this is like the Pareto principle, the 90-10. So even in that, I think Mike, go into probably your part of your data is like of that 5 million and below, most of them are probably around the $1 million. And they employ around 30 to 35 million Americans as well. And the average age of these people is the boomers. And so then we have to like layer on. So there's two more layers and then I'll shut up because again, this is the lens that I'm analyzing everything from. Is like, okay, if that's the landscape, and then you say, okay, well, the average age is now like 65 because it's the boomers, because you can look at the demographic cliff from Peter Zion or IT Economics or Ray Dalio, and we are in this demographic cliff that is happening. So it makes sense that most of the people would be, boomers. Well, now we have the top, there's the wealth inequality of all of the assets are with the wealthy people who are also boomers. So now we go the wealthy people on top of then the boomers, which kind of lays into this Pareto principle of kind of what we're seeing with the demographics. Another thing that is really important to me as I make decisions is looking at M2 money supply growth. And this is going to get into like the valuations as we talk about how valuations and risk and return are applied. Is the government prints around 7 to 8% new money every year. And that is this hidden inflation tax on all rates of return that people are not factoring into the valuation returns, which I think we'll get into like what's worth our effort to do. But I think some of the implications that I think I'm excited to unpack is like this $10 trillion baby boomer wealth tsunami, I think is a little bit more of a farce than everybody thinks. And we can talk about why, but I think that's kind of the data as I'm seeing it right now. And Mike, I don't know if you have any adjustments, any things that you've seen that contradict any of that.
No, I certainly wouldn't contradict anything that either of you have said. I tend to try to approach this topic as simply as I can. And the info piece I go to is a release by the Small Business Administration a year or two ago. And they roughly identified around 33 million small businesses in the US. That's the number that they float.
Yeah.
98% of those businesses, per their data, have less than 20 employees. That's my cutoff. That's what I use.
Okay.
So when we talk about small business owner truth, I often find myself identifying 2% truths. I'll be at a seminar and I'll be talking, and then someone will say something and it's true, but it's a 2% truth. It applies to a fraction of the attendees that's this big, right? It's literally two guys sitting in the corner that need to hear what that guy's saying. The problem is, and really my reason for being here today is that this entire marketplace is defined by content that will say things like small business owners need to know about private equity. Small business owners need to know about ESOPs. Right? We get these things that are thrown out that are true, but they're 2% true. Because if you have 20 employees or less, you don't need to know about ESOPs. And you probably don't need to know about private equity. And this monster of misinformation grows and grows and grows. And so completely agree with the data. I would define it as, I will refer today just out of simplicity to 98%. That's my small business owner number. And from my perspective, if I have a pizza and there's onions on 2% of it and the rest is cheese, I have a cheese pizza.
I love that analogy, Mike.
I do.
I think it's something we can all relate to pizzas. I mean, when you order the avo on the pizza and you get one little sliver of avo, that's not a bacon and avo pizza.
I completely resonate with how you frame that up, Mike. And so here, I'll see how I can respond to that. So I agree with that 100%. And to give another analogy, and then I'll talk about how I'm approaching this and how I'm thinking about this, because that is the true problem. I actually completely 100% agree with you. But then, okay, so I'm trying to, without losing my total marbles here, is that's the wealth inequality and the debasement, and everything is extracted to the top. So literally every single industry is trying to figure out how to sell to the people with money. And I saw a data point that like 45% of the consumption, which we're a 70% consumer-based economy, 45% of that is based on the top 10% because they're the only effing people with money. So I sit here and go, that is the problem, 100%. And then what I have personally struggled with, you all, is like, how do I make a business selling to people that have no money? And it's a really big problem. And this is where maybe we can get into business models, Mike. And I've had 3 different business models, but like a couple other layers into this is like, when I think about health, if 56% of Americans are overweight, get 8 hours of sleep, quit drinking, lift something, pull something, go for a walk and eat well. That's your advice. Don't go run an Ironman. And that's that 2% advice where like, don't go concern yourself with ice baths and meditation and the sauna and all that shit. And so I agree with you. And I have found it a challenge with 3 different business models serving the people in the lower market. And so like when I think about SMBs, it is truly people that have, and I think maybe what I could do right now, if you're okay with this, I can frame up one of the biggest challenges I've seen with even the lower end of my clients, where I think this will put maybe some context around the capital constraints of what the hell's actually going on and the real conundrums. You guys cool if I do that?
Ryan, go for it. I mean, and if I can maybe before you do that, just to kind of add to what you're saying, I think there was a fairly famous podcast. I won't mention any names, but had sort of 3 rock star entrepreneurs on fairly recently, a diary of something. And the one big piece of advice that came out of that was like,
sell to the rich, Graham. I listened to that and I heard him say it, and I'm like, I apologize for interrupting.
It's and Taki Moore is saying it, Hermosi saying it, Cody Sanchez is saying it, and like all the private equity is saying it, and like, I mean, even asset, I mean, that is the problem. I mean, like that's what happens. August 15th, 1971, Nixon decoupled from gold, and the whole like go to what the F happened in 71 is a website with like 400 pages of data. So here's what the actual problem is that I'm seeing. And then I think we can we'll continue to get more context behind this. So normalized EBITDA as a metric for value of proxy for cash flow, right? So again, they're technical, but like it's a proxy for annual cash flow. The multiple is a proxy for how many years of cash flow that company's worth. So what I look at, like the conundrum of even a business, and I've watched inflation hit advisory services, Mike, where like even the good investment bankers on ESOPs, private equity, like they're like, oh, $1 million, $2 million in normalized EBITDA, we're interested. And now it's like 5, which is like Now on $5 million in normalized EBITDA, you're talking to the right of the decimal point. It's the 0.1% of the 1%. And like, so like the capital continues to
Ryan, even $1 million or $2 million of EBITDA, we're still in 2% land.
I no, agreed with you, but like,
right?
Here, what I think that is so crucial, Mike, to get to, because at $1 million, so like at 500 grand to $2 million, I call it the no man's land. You're completely effed from almost all options, and you have like a good company.
I disagree with what you just said. Not again, purely contextually. My entire adventure with small business owners is getting them to realize the fundamental difference between a business that breaks even on the bottom line because they do creative tax planning or those sorts of things, and a business that actually shows $500,000+ of profit every year. I watch those businesses get sold every single day. I watch the ones that don't get to that basic place. Now, again, I think what you said is true from the 2% perspective. If I've got a business with EBITDA from 500,000 to 2 million, there's probably all sorts of tools that I can't take advantage of. But for the 98% of the market,
it's even less tools.
What do you mean?
Well, because if I'm talking about the clientele that's in the 500 to 2 million and they can't attract ESOP advisors because no one gives a shit. The conventional banking system for buyouts is a complete shitstorm. Private equity doesn't care because they can't put enough debt on it because debt's too expensive. There's not enough cash flow in the $5 million to $2 million in normalized EBITDA to even get deals done now. So like,
I can't give you an opinion from your side of the river. What I mean by that is looking down from mid-market, you might be 100% correct. Looking up from Main Street, you're absolutely wrong.
But
there's buyers out the door for those businesses. There's lines of buyers for those businesses.
See, this is where but that's for your perception looking up, what you just said. So, but there's not, is my point.
But Ryan, again,
let's lay the groundwork for like why. Because I want it back to like, we have to figure out if we're arguing about the same truth. So on $1 million in normalized EBITDA, people go, oh, it's worth $5 million because they're listening to podcasts and shit. Yep. So like when I say, okay, like let's just do some real quick this is gonna be about 5 minutes. I'm gonna just lay the groundwork of like, okay, why I think the concepts that I'm proposing are similar to the people that the $1 million as they are in this million-ish range. Because on $1 million normalized EBITDA, here's the numbers that I'm going for. Let's say the person says I'm worth a 5 multiple, which is probably overvalued, because on a $5 million valuation with an SBA loan, that's 70 grand a month in debt service at around a 10% rate. There's no cash flow for working capital, which is usually 15% of revenue, working capital, debt, and taxes and reinvestment. So you are completely suffocating the cash flow of $1 million company at a $5 million valuation. It's not worth that. So here's the conundrum. Now you go, okay, well, that person that owns that company has been used to making 250 to 300 grand for their whole life. They've maybe got 800 grand to $1.2 million saved up. They can't fricking retire. And they're stuck in the middle. They got 25, 30 company or employees, and it's a good business. And it's way better, or not way better, bigger than the ones that you're talking about, which perception of option, but SBA loan is a mother effer. Conventional loans of 5 to 7 years will suffocate the debt or the cash flow even more. The executives who could potentially run the company don't have any money. Then you have these searchers and then the acquisition entrepreneurs and the search funds. Private equity firms will only use that as a bolt-on because they need to gut the company to bolt it on to get the cash flow. ESOPs, now they're not even looking at ESOPs until like 3 to 4 million in normalized EBITDA. So ESOPs not an option. You might find the perfect acquisition entrepreneur, but SBA loans are now becoming even more stringent on those people. Private equity firms not interested. So it's a strategic buyer that guts the company like my dad and I did. And that's not fun. And if someone goes, well, it's my legacy. So you go back to then I'm trapped in this owner operator trap. So okay, now let's talk about what would be the options to get out of that trap, which I'm helping my cohort of people from $1 million to $5 million in normalized EBITDA think about, because they're in that trap. Is You have to take and reinvest your distributions to build out an executive team of 200 and some $1,000 people. You have to buy more inventory, launch a new ERP system with 300 grand. You have to like reinvest all your distributions. And if you said, okay, well, we're going to do that. First of all, it's going against your lifestyle. So you actually don't have the cash flow to do that unless you go get a line of credit or some way to get over that capital gap. Then you say, okay, well, it's going to take you 7 years, Mike. And you go, what the hell, Ryan? I just told you I'm tired. And it's like, because you're talking about your job, not your asset. You're tired of your job. But now let's just say, okay, let's say you said, I got the time. You're like, okay, I've got the energy, I got the time. And for God forbid, I actually have the ability to reinvest all that cash flow. You fast forward 7 years at 8% debasement. Your company, if you went from $1 million in normalized EBITDA at a 5 multiple, and you went to a $2 million in normalized EBITDA at a 6, so you go from a $5 million to a $12 million valuation, it's the same effing value because of the debasement of the dollar. So you literally wasted 7 years of your life to do the exact, to get out of that situation.
I think the important thing here
can we jump in here, Ryan? I mean, sorry to interrupt you, Kyle, but I mean, before we go on, I think, Mike, it's important for you just to kind of paint your picture, because you said up front you're seeing lots of deals getting done and people in the space. But maybe, Mike, if you can just take a few minutes just to kind of flesh out your perspective. And then, Kyle, I think it would be worthwhile for you to jump in maybe with a bit of a macro view. And then let's go into some of the strategies. So, Mike, I don't know if you want to take the floor and just, cover some of your sort of starting points.
Yeah, and it's an odd conversation, as it often is for me, because I don't disagree with anything that Ryan just said. I just don't think it applies to most people sitting in the room. And again, when I say that, what I'm picturing is 100 random business owners in a room. And Ryan, what you just talked about, when you talked about 500,000 to 2 million of EBITDA, leaves 97 of them off out of the conversation. So we can spend time talking about the 1% or the 3%. But what I'm pushing back on, and I think why we're here today, is during that podcast that we did together, there was a point at which I rudely interrupted you, Ryan, and asked, who are we talking to?
Yeah, and Graham and Kyle didn't answer.
Because you appropriately said, hey, Graham and Kyle.
Which is why we're here, right?
Yeah, because I'm like, you're saying things that are true, but they're only true for the 2%. It's not true for the 97 or 97.5%. And that is the nature of this topic writ large, is that we say things like business owners should, and it applies to that narrow band. But what about the plumber with 3 guys who's never earned more than $250? What can he do? That's the audience. That's the market. That's the pizza. So I'd like to talk to them. When we talk today, that's who I'm talking to. I am unapologetically small business.
So what is it that you like? What? Let's frame up. I love it. And I agree. And this is why I think it's like when I said before we hit record is we're providing the yin and the yang to provide the full picture here. And like neither of us, and that's why neither of us are disagreeing with each other, because we're trying to figure, and it took me 11 years, by the way, Mike, to figure out how to find my 2%. So that way I'm not speaking to the, that's why I go to Vistage workshops. And that's why like all of my clients are in that space, but no disagreement of like, how do we, and this is why I'm really, truly intellectually curious of like, how are you economically for yourself providing services to people that don't have the wherewithal to do that? Because like when I think about the challenges of those people, it's like, okay, you finally get burnt out to that plumber and like, have you saved any money? Can you actually retire? So then this like, oh, by the way, you might get a couple $100,000 and like, you're like, how long is that going to last you? So can you actually even get out of the conundrum that you're in? So I'm curious on like, how do you approach that situation?
It's great because I think it speaks to why I turn a little bit of tack dog when this subject comes up, when I'm in a generalized podcast talking about something else. And that is because that same plumber who hasn't saved anything went to his financial planner 2 years beforehand and had that planner run him through a valuation tool
Go
for
biz
his
equity is
business
just a BS one. Yeah. I'm just kidding.
that
Right? Graham and Kyle.
showed a $7 million value for his business.
I know.
And so why would he save anything? He got told that he gets flyers every day and emails and phone calls from brokers saying, "Right, when you're ready to sell your business, call us because we'd love to talk to you." Now, that broker never says that I reject 90% of the owners I talk to because they have unsellable businesses.
Yep.
But the broker's got to talk in order to find out what's behind the curtain. The whole system's freaking broken.
Yeah.
And
So a question for you on this, because I agree with you, Mike. And so I had a stupid attack 10 years ago after we sold the business, and I got my securities license. And when I went into wealth management for 18 months, and I thought I got
to write that down, by the way. Stupid attack. I love that.
It was like, what the hell am I doing here? I got my Series 65, got my investment license, helped a small RIA build their book of business. And I was like, fiduciary fee only 1%. Everyone's effing you over. And then I realized, like, no one's got any money. I was like, no one's got any money. So everybody that, like, on $1 million, and so on 500 grand, which is the minimum assets under management at that time, you're talking $5,000. You can't even afford to meet with the people, really. And because you're not selling insurance, and I'm like, well, everybody needs this. And I'm like, I hate like the Northwestern Mutuals and like all the people slinging annuities and they're jamming shit. And like, back to like, here's your financial advice, person that's making 300 grand, spend less than you earn. Max out your 401ks for you and your spouse, your HSA, your FSA, and have a nice life.
Right.
And so like when I looked at it, I'm like, well, but then they have no help and then no one does it. So then I'm like, is there, and I had to come to this weird grips, like, is there actually a place in the world for the people selling the random products and shit because they can afford to work with these people? And then I look at the exit planning community, Mike, and I really want your thoughts on this. Is like, I look at like, okay, you go to the exit planning events and it's the insurance salesperson and it's the CPA and it's the wealth manager and the broker and it's everyone trying to suck fees off that 97%. And all of that's misadvice and misinformation for the person that you're trying to help. So totally recognize and I just couldn't figure out an economic model to figure out like, how do I actually help these people avoid all of those problems? But then I was going to go broke doing it. And I almost... True story.
It's all fair commentary. I would add to the comment about the exit planning environment. I think most of them are chasing that top 2, 3, 4%. Right? That's ideally. But
they're the ones confusing everybody, though, right, Mike? To your point.
Well, the brokers, the attorneys, the accountants, everybody chasing upscale. Everybody speaking to that room of 100 people and talking to the two guys in the corner.
But I don't even think, I agree with you, but I don't even think the community does a good, because I got out of that community like 8 years ago. I was like, all done. And it was because no one clearly articulated it. And there was all this fee chasing that like, but still people weren't doing what you're doing. Like this is why I was so excited to have this conversation. It's like, hey, I'm acknowledging the facts and I'm choosing a lane versus like, making it more obscure to find the random person that is confused so they can make their fee.
Yeah, great. Before we go on, Ryan, I need to hit rewind because I feel like you caught the key earlier. I feel like you said a truth that's really important for us to highlight. You said nobody has any money. And I think that by and large, that's true. And that's why this topic is so freaking important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because if a small business owner can change their business and navigate to an $800,000 exit or a $1.3 million exit, that's freaking life-changing. It's life-changing. And we forget that. In this space where we are told that 7-figure, 8-figure, 9-figure, when every exit we read about is, I sold my business in 18 months to Google before we made a single. It's just,
Mhm.
It's M&A porn is what it is. But these exits are life-changing for owners who can achieve them in the real world. The problem is that most don't pay attention to the topic at all. So they simply wait and fail. Those that do pay attention to the topic end up getting sucked into this vortex of misinformation.
Yeah.
And those few rare that are able to find information and change their business get to change their life for the better. So I didn't want to lose that, because I really think that is the thing that we forget, that for the hairdresser who can make a $300,000 exit on her business because she lined things up right, that's life changing. Yep. That puts her kid through college. I mean, it's just, that's how we keep up.
So I just reframe things a little bit and just pose a question to everybody. If you think about the drivers of valuation, you're looking at risk, you're looking at cash flow, and you're looking at growth rates. So does it not make sense? I mean, obviously, in the coming years, these small businesses are going to get squeezed more and more and more as the years go on. I mean, as Ryan, you touched on, we're adding 8% every year to the M2 money supply. It's the most evil hidden tax that nobody's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Putting on like my capital allocator hat here, does it not make sense for some of these small businesses to start thinking about growth rates and thinking, what alternative assets can I invest my distributions into that will outpace the growth of a traditional exit? Because if you think about it, you exit for, call it 1.2 million after taxes, after legal fees, after you've paid your distributions to the M&A advisors, you're kind of left with a down payment for a house. Whereas if you start investing 5-10 years earlier with, call it $5,000 compounded for a year, so you call that like 60 grand going into an investment vehicle, you might actually outpace that growth in the long term. And I think that's maybe a different way to frame things and look at things.
If I may, before Ryan and I'm sure Mike respond to that, I just want to use a couple of personal examples, and I think we can apply it to a business context. So, I mean, as everyone listening can hear by the accents, Kyle originally and me still come from a country where things like inflation and risk and that are part of our daily lives. When US inflation has been running at 1-2%, our inflation where I live has been running, upwards of 7, 8, 9 double-digit inflation for a number of years. So, we're used to dealing with these things and how you need to outpace that. But I don't think the economic system is geared to support some of the stuff. And sometimes, as you say, it's about extracting value rather than creating value. A personal example, my dad is 75 years old. He had a stroke a few years ago, and he had a risk policy which paid out in the event of a dread disease, which was a stroke. And at the end of the day, he had been contributing to this for 20 odd years, and the payout basically was less than a month's salary, which I'm earning in current day. My dad is one of the people that Mike refers to. He was basically got made redundant in his 40s and was a handyman ever since, climbing ladders, fixing things, a one-man business with a helper. Anyway, back to this policy. When I actually unpacked this policy, there was fine print in that said, hey, your insurance premium is going up 7% every year, but the benefit is only going up 3% every year. So literally, it was completely skewed for him as a small business owner. He took this because if anything happened while he was still working, he needed to provide for my mom and what have you. But actually, within 3 years, the way that policy was structured basically screwed him over. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here with small business owners is they don't have access to, the right advice at the right fees. And it's a conundrum that you speak about, Ryan, is because, it's simply too expensive and nobody wants to serve that market, so, I think all these things kind of converge, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then I do want to move on to kind of like, how can we, what are some of the principles? What are some of the things that guys in this space can do? Because there are a lot of principles that apply to both the low end and the top end and are true for both. But equally, there are things that are dangerous that if you apply to the top end, they don't work at the bottom end. So maybe let's explore that a little bit.
Yeah, I like that. And what I can do is, because I do think, as I'm about to explain, because I'll tell my personal experience about how I handle this. And I do think that even though the numbers are bigger, the conundrum is still the same. The owner operator trap, whether it's $1 million or if it's $10 million, I think because of the debasement of the dollar, we're now seeing the middle market, like the middle class is gone in America. Like it's 15 grand to manage a like middle class, like no like Disney trips. I mean, like it's a very freaking expensive. Before we hit record, it's $3,500 a month for daycare. I mean, it's a freaking joke. Health insurance is 24 grand. You go through it, it's 15 grand a month. So like it's the CPI is junk. M2 money supply growth is what I look at. So like, I'll explain what I decided to do because now I am in the cohort of what you're talking about, Mike. Because like and this is what's core to my framework of how to think. And it's all about how I've managed my own decisions. Like all I care about, you guys, as an individual, if I wake up and I do shit, is it worth it? The only thing I want is more independence. I want to do whatever I want every freaking day because I'm professionally unemployable. like I'm not good in a boardroom unless I'm helping chair the board, right? And so I think that resonates probably with a lot of our audience. It's like, I just want to do whatever I want to do, and I'm willing to take ridiculous risks and actually work harder on my own terms than work for a $250,000 salary in the corporate ladder. So what information I needed and what framework I needed to make that decision was my time, cash flow, and wealth. It's this Venn diagram. And I say it's the independence flywheel where we want to use the theory of constraints for forward upward momentum. Where like, if I invest my time and my cash flow, I better be growing equity. And it has to be worth it. Or I'm going to take more cash flow today and less equity tomorrow. I mean, there's always a trade-off of one of those three. So to answer the question for me, is it worth Ryan's time? So when I turned around the family business where there was a big infrastructure in this, and it was 20 million, Mike. So it was like in the 2%, there was enough shit to turn around and enough machine to like do things with.
Yep.
I've started 2 businesses since. Oh my God, it's 10 times harder. Like it's so miserable. I hate it so much. So my last company, I'm sitting there on this flywheel and all of a sudden we hit the 7-figure mark. Like, yeah, I'm like, I'm broke. I have no money. I'm going like, and then there's 3 of us. And I'm like, oh my God, like if we all want to make 6 figures, there's no money to reinvest. And I'm like, well, the only way to have enough money to reinvest is to raise some money. That dilutes my equity. And I'm like, blah, and I'm going through this whole decision tree. And I'm like, if I did all this and I got it to 2 million in normalized EBITDA and 5 multiple in 2029, and I split it 3 ways, debt and taxes, and I get $3 million and $3 million worth 2 million, I'm like, I'm fucked. I'm like, I'm screwed no matter what. And I'm going, so like what I came to, and there's a lot of loaded thoughts behind this and like thousands of hours of research. The whole system's so broke. It's so broke that I can't even spend 7 years to grow a valuable business that would put me in the 2%. And it still's not worth my time because I could do other things. And then I stumbled on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is what I think is perfect money. And it is completely sound, incorruptible, completely decentralized, and it's volatile because it's a growing market. But Bitcoin is the new risk-free hurdle rate. So I believe through generating more cash today with more freedom of time. So instead of reinvesting for equity, I'm actually earning income to stack into wealth generating assets that have on average a 30% CAGR over 4 years. So like, I believe that there is a way out where like, and that's the whole point of Bitcoin. It's releasing the pressure valve of all of these inflated assets. Like Costco is a 55 multiple right now. It's not a freaking growth stock. It's the most overvalued stock market in history. Cause like, again, I go back to then when I look at my clients and say, okay, if you got $1 million, $5 million of fiat shit at closing, what are you going to do with it? And then we have to go through the buildup and go, well, anything below 8%, you're locking in a loss. The public markets there's only 5 companies that over exceed the M2 money supply growth. Then you go to private equity companies and you go all the way back down to, wouldn't it be really nice to own a plumbing business that kicks out 300 grand in cash that has a better balance of my time? And it's the same conundrum for someone with $1 million business and a lifestyle that's trapped in it as $1 million business or 10 million or $1 million. And because like the treadmill is going up a notch every single day on us. And we have to grow faster and faster and faster just to keep in the same spot. So I don't know. There's a lot of loaded concepts in there, but like, that's how I've figured out a way out for myself. And I feel like and again, there has to be like I believe that's true button that's hit in order to actually do that. And that's not for everybody, but Mike, there's a lot there.
Let me ask you a question based on what you just said. We're looking at that room full of 100 owners. How many of them do you think what you just said applies to? How many of them can use the solution you just advocated for?
Every person in the world can dollar cost average, and the savings finally works again. If you saved $10 a day for the last 16 years, you'd have 1.7 million bucks of Bitcoin. And I'm not a crypto guy.
Hear me out, because again, I don't disagree with. I can't speak to anything that you're saying from that side of the river. But for the 98 owners in that room who are trying to figure out if they have a way to create value with their business, what you're saying is no, buy Bitcoin.
No, what I'm saying is...
Can I just reframe this? Let me see if I've got this right. Because I think it goes back to what I was saying is, Mike, maybe is the question not if a business is generating cash flows, does it make more sense for that owner-operator to reinvest in an asset that's going to outgrow their business over the 5 or 10 year period? Is that resonating with?
Are you saying as opposed to reinvesting in the business?
As opposed to reinvesting in the business and potentially not making enough of a hurdle to actually get rich at the end when they do eventually exit.
Well, and if they get the 800 grand, what are they going to do with it? It's still, it applies to everybody, because like even people that have $100,000 salary and can't figure a way out to retire, there has to be a solution. Otherwise, everyone's on that melting treadmill.
I mean, right.
And if instead everyone's chasing to either get into the 2% or plug as much money as they can into Bitcoin, I don't see how that framing helps our 98%.
Because I'll put it very clearly, from my perspective, is for someone that's got $1 million revenue business, let's say they've got 5 employees, and I mean, are they pulling down 200 grand pre-tax, post-tax? Like, how much is someone making on $1 million in revenue? Like,
it depends on the business.
Let's make some generalizations.
To $500,000.
What do you want to have as the bell curve assumption? 200?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do that.
Is that after tax?
Okay, sure. Let's say after tax.
So then I mean, we have to look at, Kyle and Graham, you guys can jump in of because I think it's helpful putting a frame around and there's going to be deviations from this for sure. Cause we're trying to if there's a bell curve and we're looking at, hey, if someone's in the $1 million mark, what are their options? So I believe to say, okay, well, I'll just explain it from how I handled that question over the last 10 years with the 3 companies I've had. Do I have to take less money today to reinvest to get my equity of my wealth? And if I don't do that, then what? So then there's a couple different, there's only a couple solutions to getting out of that trap. It's okay, well, I reinvest. So it's 7 years of my time and cash flow to get to the 2%, which still mathematically actually doesn't really make any sense. But we could assume it does to get to the 2%, because now you can be on all the awards and whatever, and it's an ego reason, and great. But it still doesn't mathematically make a bunch of sense. But if you don't, then you say, okay, well, I still need to retire. And then what kind of lifestyle do I have? If I'm making 200 grand and my lifestyle creep has hit that, and I've got my write-offs and I got all that shit that's going through the business, and I need effectively, if you did how much money would you need to retire? And you go, you probably haven't saved a ton. And by a ton, I mean the stats out there, it went from 800 grand to 1.6 million for a safe retirement now with Social Security. And if you look at the lifestyle that these people are talking about, it's a bunch of shit. It's says who that's a meaningful lifestyle. And I'm not begrudging someone that saved a couple $1,000,000. That's a lot of money. And based on my wealth management from 10 years ago, you're in the 1% if you got a couple $1,000,000. So this whole conundrum is real. And so then I think that there is a thesis that and again, I don't work in the space, but I think this still applies to some of the people on the lower end of the people I'm working with, which is if you were to design a business that is decoupling your time from it over time. So you're looking at the different ways of what's the opportunity cost of reinvestment versus just putting in systems to generate a decent amount of cash flow as an annuity while working 10 hours a week. There might be some way to then save some money while you're solving the burnt out phase where if really you're burnt out of your job, it's not you're burnt out of your asset because the asset's not really there yet.
So Ryan, if you don't mind, I want to jump in here and I want to give Mike the floor because I'm just going to play back a couple of things. If what we talking about here, okay, and I'm paraphrasing. On the one hand, what you're saying is, hey, what's quite interesting actually is that we're talking about micro, we're talking about small business, but actually, Ryan, you're talking a macro discussion. You're talking about actually where the economy is going. Okay, the whole sort of Keynesian approach to economics, whether it's in the US or globally or whatever. Okay, so there's actually a whole separate discussion around that. But if what you're saying is true, then the question I've got, is it futile? Is it futile for the 97%? Okay. And I simply can't believe that it's futile for the 97%. And Mike, I think if we can, I think it's really important that, you maybe just take the floor because you're working with the 97% on a daily basis. And it's not futile. There are people there that are living good lives that are fulfilled and but is that a short-term thing on with the backdrop of what's happening from a global or macroeconomic perspective? Mike, maybe take 5-10 minutes just to kind of talk through that. What are you seeing on a sort of daily, weekly, monthly basis?
Yeah, thank you, Graham. I'm a pragmatic guy by nature. And so I don't want to talk about the macro in response to your question. I want to talk about Carl. Carl's an owner that I worked with who, when I sat down with him, he had a modestly successful, very small business, 3-4 employees, kicking $170,000 a year to sellers' discretionary earnings, works harder than he wants to. 3 years later, Carl's business is probably 30 or 40% larger than it was. So we've increased it in size. His seller's discretionary earnings up at 350 to 4. He's not doing 80 hours a week anymore. And he's a couple days from signing his sale document. Now that sale document's going to put 1.2 in his pocket. From down payment and some payout along the way. That's life-changing for Carl. Does that satisfy his health insurance need 25 years after he retires? I don't know.
How old is Carl?
He's in his late 50s. I don't know how to solve the macro problem. I know that my life changed fundamentally when I was able to go from an unsellable business to a sellable business. When I sold, I didn't make never work again money, but I made never work at a job I don't want to money. And that's a freaking miracle. Compared to that burden of financial stress and overwhelming anxiety of having credit cards lined up on my desk where I'm using the check I got from this credit card to pay off this credit card because this one's at 0% for 3 months. And then if I push this over, to go from that to a place where I'm debt free, where I have investable income, where I have investable capital to decide to do what I want to do next, where I can actually prioritize how do I want to spend my time equally with how do I make money? Guys, I know we live in an Instagram world where I'm supposed to worry about my private jet, but we're talking about life-changing realities for that 97, 98 people in that audience that we're talking to. They are the entirety of the audience. They are the market. I like to talk to them, and it's easy to get discouraged looking at this stuff. But the reality is that small business owners can make incremental changes in their businesses that create the opportunity for a real world life-changing exit. Or to your point, Ryan, and it's a great point, change their business enough so they can keep owning it without consuming ounce ounce of life, resource, and energy they have. Ownability and sellability are the same thing. I love that outcome. It's part of the reason I don't work based on commission is because I've had too many owners fall back in love with their business, decide that working 20 hours a week and making more income than they did before is a great outcome for their business. And they're going to do that until they get ready to retire. Great, fabulous. But the 97 in the audience that are listening here that want to know that there is a path to change their business and change their life, I'm a firm believer that path exists.
I do agree too. I just want to make sure that I don't think it's futile either, and I think that's why we're having this conversation. But I can understand why some of the comments I may have made it seem like that, and I respect everything you said, Mike. I do. Go ahead, Graham.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say is that I think at the end of the day, when you strip everything away, it's actually not about a valuation or a number. It's actually about giving people choices in terms of how they want to live their life. Okay, whatever the economic system is. And I think what is quite interesting in this, let's call it, I don't want to use the lower end of the market, let's call it
the whole market, Graham. It's the whole freaking market.
Yeah. Actually, you're right. In terms of numbers, you're absolutely right. Okay. But I think the point is that for a lot of these guys, yes, it's life changing, but selling at a 3 times on discretionary earnings or whatever the number is, in many instances is not going to be enough, as you say, to cover health insurance for the next 25 years and all that. What it might be enough to do, though, is to give somebody a reset for 3 years, and do something else.
What happens? Do you guys know a lot? Do you guys know a lot of 65 to 68-year-olds that want to reset though, and a new identity crisis? I mean, I went through that at 27. It was a bitch, and that's where I want to know I so agree with you, Mike, and at 55, you're capable of having more runway.
But and Ryan, I'm sorry to interrupt because I don't want to lose our agreement. And I think we both agree on the first 7 steps. We're talking about what happens after that, right? What has to happen first is you've got to change how you approach your business. You've got to increase the profitability. You've got to grow. You've got to make it less dependent on yourself. All of that is true. And then you get to a place where you're putting $300,000, $400,000, $700,000, $800,000 away. Okay, now we might have disagreement about what comes next. But
yeah, well, I thank you very much for grounding us. And I think what hit me just now, Mike, as you were saying that, and I'm curious on your thoughts about this. So we talked about the misinformation, the convolution, and no owner knows what the F they're listening to and why. I mean, I got boilers and commercial cleaners and HVAC technicians, and they're like, I don't know what the hell these suits are talking about. And so even if all those advisors are actually trying to speak to the 2%, which is kind of what you said, right? Because everybody, no one's acknowledging it like we are, but like if that's in reality what's happening, which confuses the hell out of everybody. So everybody's trying to reorient themselves like, is this applicable to me? Is this not applicable to me? Which is complicated because if you're the boiler tech or the commercial cleaner or the plumber, you still don't know if you're part of the 2% that it's relevant or not, because they don't know what the hell anybody's talking about. And so like they're still just left confused as shit regardless. And so okay, so let me know if you think this is true or not, because I put some notes on it. It's like, in your situation with your side of the market that you're working in, I think the words exit planning potentially do apply because it is the job and the asset commingled into one. And you like, that is a good way. Like people are probably generally burnt out. So they're looking for a way out of the whole situation. And so I could see, because you've been hearing me say, like, I think exit planning as a concept is a bunch of shit for my audience and why I think that is. And so like all of those advisors that are preaching to my audience, I think they can go pound sand. And here's why, is because when you have enough cash flow like that, it's a effing asset, and your job and the asset are not the same thing. So it's a complete false choice of this exit planning. So like what it kind of came to me, and back to this whole relativity of the seeing the size, is like, I can completely see on your end exit planning being a completely coherent thought process. But when you get to that certain size, I just can't subscribe to it all being one thing, because the asset and the job are wildly different because you got to a certain size. What are your thoughts on my...
I have no pushback on that. I'm not a fan of exit planning as phrasing anyways. I'm an exit ready proponent. I think the key for an owner is to build a business that they can sell tomorrow or keep forever. It's not to execute a decade-long plan. I'm gonna sell then, and then I end up with a diagnosis in 2 years, right? The goal is to get to exit ready. I think the framing that you're talking about is an important learning step for even small business owners, but it comes after other basic things. Like it comes after you stop using your bank balance to make budgetary decisions. It comes after we start to evolve away from the basics that just way too many owners bring into their ownership of a small business, and navigate to a place where we're looking at that business differently. But yeah, I can't disagree with what you're saying.
I think that's just why it's so helpful for myself, and hopefully for all of our audiences, is that just understanding where, if the person listening, where you're at in this spectrum of the journey. So then you can place yourself to say, like, what resources can I afford? And what do I have? Like, and maybe what I can do as we get into kind of the how, Mike, and I'm really, really curious on your how in your practice. And I can I'll kind of just start to lay the groundwork of like what I found is the challenge is I was like flopping around, not quantifying or not articulating my market, which is the valley of death for a business. Like I couldn't figure out who my ideal client profile was. And it took me, a decade to land on, apparently, like Clint Fiore calls it, the whale sharks. It's like, okay, now I've got mine. The challenge that, like, because I have a heart for all the people that you do too. And like, I couldn't figure out. It's the same thing with like all my service. Like everyone needs all this stuff, but like, if they don't have any money, what is the right economic business model to satisfy how many people and how scalable is that business model? And when I think about like the challenges, that some of the biggest challenges I saw with people in that, honestly, of all company sizes, Mike, I mean, like 3,000 people in Vistage have been through my workshop. 10% have a 3-statement forecast. I mean, billion-dollar companies, like they're making shit up. And so when we look at, if I was in that spot, I would need to see a forward-looking forecast to say, I need, as Ryan Tansom, to make 200 grand. And if I do these things, I don't have 200 grand and I have my bills to pay. So it's that forward-looking forecast that actually is needed to make those decisions. But then when I tried to build out a CFO business, I couldn't actually build out the CFO business, employ the CFOs, get my gross profit on the company side, pay my taxes to make it worth it for me, because it was still $5 to $7 grand a month. And then they would need a bookkeeper and they would need all this stuff and their data would be shit. And I'm sitting there going, I can't figure out a business model to help those people that don't have any money, even though like the numbers and that trade-off decision, so they don't run out of their own personal income, was the biggest constraint that I saw. But how do you approach someone that's got that 175 and they don't, like, they've got how much to work with you, and then they're going to have to spend more money on other things? How do you navigate that?
Well, it's a fair question, and it's a real question, because I can talk about the 98%, but the truth is, and I don't know the number, what percentage of those owners are actually showing a profit in their business and making more than market rate salary for themselves? We probably just lost 50 or 60% of the audience, right? If we use that as a cutoff, they could go somewhere else and get paid more doing the same job for someone else than they're doing for themselves. So, yep. I mean, for me, so
now we're at 47%.
Yeah, well, exactly. We keep cutting the pie. It's a good question. I think for the purposes of the topic today, where I land on that is when I look and ask the question, how do you sell medicine to people who don't know they're sick? I don't think there's a lack of need out there for this information or for this service. I think there's a lack of understanding with small business owners around how they can make things better, make things different. And so when I sit down with an owner, it's usually a function, given the content I put out, they usually know what they're getting before I ever sit down with them. So, but having them in a place where they have a sustainable business, even if it's not a wildly successful business, I found for myself that's the starting line, right? I've done turnarounds before, but I don't want to be a turnaround guy.
Yeah, amen to that.
And so, if you can start from sustainability, we can start to look and ask some basic questions that can reframe. And let me give you one example. We talk about what I want in the future. We talk about what enough is. And one of the exercises I'll go through with an owner is, paint me the picture. Show me what happens after you sell this business for, what you're targeting. How much are you going to spend on X? What's your household budget? How are you going to do? Because and that's to the forward-looking forecasting that you're talking about, right? Because I've had more than a few owners go through that exercise and realize that the lifestyle that they actually want, the freedom that they want, takes a smaller number than they thought it was going to. And their exit and their opportunity to start living the life they actually want to be living happens way faster. So I don't know if I answered your question.
But yeah, I think you're getting close, and I'll reciprocate, and then maybe we can get into some specifics. So or more specific. So over the last decade, I got my value builder certification, tried different ways, the value opportunity profile, tried different ways with that engagement. So I tried to bake it in, again, 2014 and 15 into like a planning fee for the asset under management. I got the hell out of that because I hated it in the business model. It's only on liquidity, wrong incentives. And so back to there's wrong incentives everywhere. So I couldn't figure out a business model so Carl, who's got 175 grand, how much can I charge Carl so I don't go broke? While also Carl needs to, guess what? And Mike McCulloch is profit first is great. But we're still we're breaking breaking your financials into bank accounts as a company is still pretty elementary. You need at least a forecast. And then it's your data's shit. So So let's say we do what you just said, and so like I had all these different certifications, all these different consulting, ways of going about this. And then I land on the fractional CFO services. I'm like, well, I couldn't even do that, Mike, because everyone's data is shit. And I'm like, you have nothing that we can even like, so then I was like, well, maybe not a CFO. Maybe we could do this dashboard thing. We can connect the dashboard to your QuickBooks. I'm like, well, your QuickBooks is shit. And I'm like, well, then you need to hire a bookkeeper at $3,000. And they're like, I don't have enough money. And so it was just every time I turned, there was not enough money. And so where I landed and so I'll walk you through exactly how it took me this long to figure out this opportunity of this business model. So I landed on a coaching business, which is different than a consultant or an advisor where I don't do anything. As in I'm providing the playbook and the education. Yep. And so there are 3 ways to work with me. So I have one-on-ones, that's $3,000 a month. And I have Monday trainings, Tuesday group Q&As, and then I have a one-on-one with people on an individual basis to run their ownership meeting, and then do a quarterly board meeting. And then there's the group program, which is $1,500 a month. But the entry point is what I call the boardroom blueprint, which is $10,000. And so it's literally, you have to clarify all your goals. You got to get a 3-statement model. You got to get a business valuation. So at the end of the 90 days, we can talk to each other like owners. But that pricing for the 2% is still hard to swallow. Mm-hmm. So instead of me going as a CFO at $7,000 a month and then only getting one piece of the puzzle, what I'm trying to do and I'm curious if this applies down market is I believe, and it's been proven to be true, if I can help them make better decisions with their but they're making the decisions and they're doing the implementation because they see what good looks like. It's you still got to go hire the bookkeeper. You still got to go put in the executive recruiter. But the pricing reduction of having a coaching model that's leveraged like that allows me to work with these people. Otherwise, when I was doing the consulting practice, I was like $40,000. And they're like, that's my boat.
It's a non-starter.
Yep. Right. 100%. So I'm curious, where I'm going with the bigger market. I'm hopefully that my free education can start having people thinking like this, like you're saying, so that way they can work with you, or then, maybe they work with you before they work with me. But how have you solved that economic issue for yourself? And what processes or tools have you come across?
It's interesting. When I started the business, I started with a curriculum model in mind. And what became very clear very quickly, again, back to that question, how do you sell medicine to people who don't know they're sick, right? Yeah, $79 a month.
Give their doctors commissions. No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. Thank you. I didn't find a curriculum answer. I landed on the coaching for the very reasons that you just described, because ultimately, especially for the 98%, the only way the business changes is through the owner. They're too tied to the business just because of its size in most cases for it to be anything other than that. But well-informed, engaged, energetic owners can freaking change just about anything. And so that exercise with them of helping them see the impact of making some of those changes, that's where the model had to come down to. It would just became too clear that anything that was canned might be able to inform, but it was never going to engage.
So did you try some of those systems like I was talking about?
I didn't. I made my own. And it was very helpful for me relative to the coaching I do, because that's the curriculum I use.
Got it.
But the idea, and again, part of this is what kind of business are we trying to build, right? I like the work that I do with the owners that I do it with. I'm not looking to build and scale a platform.
Your practice.
Yeah.
This
is what I do. So,
I think that's why it's so fun what we're doing here, because I don't know how many people I tap out my one-on-ones at 15, and then everybody else has to grow into the group because my time is the constraint that I work everything from.
Sure.
And then so then the group is the only other way for me to help more people. Then everything after that is my free content. But have you, when you go in and you've got your select people, that's what we're trying to do with this podcast with Graham and Kyle here, is more people need to hear this. So that way, when they're talking to another advisor and you and I can't work with anybody else, we still want to help those people, the Carls and the Bobs and the Jans of the world. When you're going in there, I'm really curious, of your curriculum, I feel like there's probably a huge overlap of the same dumpster fire. There's just an extra zero at the end of my revenue clients.
That's almost certainly correct.
So, but there's less resources because I think you're probably, I think there probably is even way more parallels where like even my client base, after working capital, debt, taxes, and reinvestment, none of them are like filthy jet rich. None of them. I mean, like, and it's all about expectation setting. If someone expected to have $10 million, but they only have 4, they're unhappy. Whether it's like, I think the sentiment is probably similar to your clients as is to mine, going, I'm just not there yet. And I was promised I could get there. And this is way harder than I thought.
Right.
How are you going in there and like, look at like, what's the state of the situation of the operations? Like for the financials, how does Carl make a decision of like, hire the bookkeeper? Do you have preferred people, or do you show what good looks like on bookkeeping, and then like what employee reviews look like? Do you like subscribe to something like EOS? Like what are the different things that you're telling Carl to do to go from 170 to 350?
It's a really a great question, and the answer is that we're probably not talking about the technical business stuff until we've been working together for 4 or 5 months. Because we're going to start on, what do you want? Where are you actually trying to get to with this business? And what is a realistic expectation? And this is where our friends at BizVal come back in. What is a realistic expectation for what the market is going to require your business to look like in order to create the value that you say you want to create? Don't give me dreams. Don't give me fantasies, the rule of thumb, 2 times revenue garbage. Tell me what you're trying to get to. Then, as I alluded to earlier, here's an exercise to tell me why. Because if you want to live in a farm in northern Iowa and stay home with the kids and raise animals, you probably don't need 15 million on your exit, right, to do that. So
maybe not even 4, like you said, maybe 1.2.
Yeah. How do we get? What do we want? What does the business look like now? What does it need to look like to give us what we want? And then that's the path we start to walk together.
So just a question for both of you. I mean, obviously defining success is always, it's the cornerstone of I'd almost say it's the cornerstone of happiness in a sense when it comes to like, getting an exit, because you don't know where you want to go and you don't have a succinct plan to get there.
Any road will do, said Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah. So of the people that you speak to, Mike, it sounds like you have a process once someone's engaged to figure out what that looks like. But how many people would you say on average actually have that figured out before they engage you both?
Might go for it.
Oh, I would say comprehensively, almost never. But to be fair, that's part of why they're coming to me in the first place.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to answer that, because I think if I were, I'm going to answer it 2 ways. Everyone I know that's a business owner, after 450 plus podcasts and all the workshop attendees, everyone just wants independence that I've gathered. The general, I'll call it the 98%, not the 2%. The 2% might want something else, but like ego reason, but like I just want independence for whatever is driving me. It could be validation that I'm a good person because I had a bad childhood. It could be because I didn't like the employer that I quit from. It could be because I lost my job and I had to figure something out. But like somehow it's rooted in, I want to own my outcomes. And I believe that I can get a return, hopefully of time, cash flow, equity on those outcomes of the hard work that I'm willing to put in. So like, I'd say like most people can't say it just like that, but it's like, I want freedom. It's all the BS, freedom, financial freedom. And it's all these bumper stickers. But at the root of it, it is like, cause I just want to do whatever I want. I want to be able to like put my daughters on the bus, and I want to be able to like, go to their conference tomorrow. And I think other people have that. And then the business operations swallows them up. And I think to your point, Kyle, like I say this thing in my workshops where if the bottom, so for the people listening, and I've got this bottom, like horizontal axis, and then there's this, call it 45-degree angle, and there's this gap in between where the top, 45-degree angle is expectations. And in the gap is resentment and unhappiness. And we're trying to correlate expectations and reality. And so most people, like no one, I would say, that I work with can articulate specifically what does that mean of that independence, which is what I then spend time going, okay, well, how do you want to spend your time? What do you want? Like, how much do you want to be in the operations versus your ownership and your personal time? So I have this time equation and what your role is. And then I say, okay, out of your cash flow. So if you're making 250, Mike, right now in salary and no distributions, a lot of my clients, they want to say, okay, after these exercises, like we want to flip that to 250 in distributions while Graham's running my company and I can afford his W-2 in my income statement.
Yep.
And then we go to the wealth side and say, okay, well, I have maybe $1.5 million in retirement outside the business. And now I need $1.5 million in equity in the business in 4 years. Mm-hmm. So like, that's the frame, the time, cash flow, wealth, how I double click it, make sure that it's calibrated. But then what I have found, no one understands valuations, which is why I've spent a disproportionate amount of my time over the years explaining how they work and coming up with frameworks on how to think about valuations. Because if you're going to, like, I have so many insane examples, like my dad and I being one of them, like we're waking up and eating shit every day and having no idea whether we're growing value or not. It's insane. It's like you wouldn't just pile money into your 401k if you didn't think it was going to go up. And like to just do that and just guess is insane to me. So what it sounds like both Mike and I are doing is like, is what you're going to do worth it, bridging the expectations and reality? And so I spend a lot of time explaining the valuations, how they work. So that way you say, if you take your cash flow and reinvest it because you're foregoing cash, here's how it would bump your equity. And in what timeline? Well, I don't want to work that hard. Okay. You can take more money today, but you have less wealth for tomorrow. So like, I'm kind of doing the same thing, but I independence is, I'd say like they could answer that, but they can't answer like, okay, what is the actual landscape of the rules of the game? Like I always, like my last comment is, you know, before understanding all this, I felt like I was playing soccer, but like I got shoved out onto the field and no one told me the rules. So I was playing the game of business and I'm like, I don't know. I'm just like I'm chasing everybody else around. And I think we only use our hands sometimes. Right. And like, so it's like, I just wanted to get the complete understanding of the rules in order to actually make better decisions.
100%, Ryan. And let's bring it back to the main topic of today. How many of those misconceptions that you end up coaching owners away from came to them through the content that we're talking about that was driven, written, projected by someone targeting a very specific, I don't know how many owners I've come across, but it's more than a few whose first introduction to exit was a 2-hour luncheon on ESOPs put on by their law firm.
Or you got generational equity. They got a machine of salespeople.
Yeah, it's yet they can't define sellers' discretionary earnings, right? That same owner can't, or they're, well, gee, how much profit do I actually need to make to be able to afford this ESOP? Because we've been breaking even it's just.
The ESOP journey is not worth it because it's going to take you 10 years and you're going to have to raise money or whatever the hell it is. I mean,
but hold on one second, Ryan, because just this example, I brought it up. I looked before we got on the call. There's less than 7,000 ESOPs in the entire country. Not 7,000 a year, 7,000 total. 34 million small businesses, 7,000 ESOPs. Why does any small business owner know what an ESOP is? Because someone else has an agenda that they're pursuing, that language, that information starts to permeate, and then we shouldn't be surprised when that same owner comes to us with a misunderstanding about value.
Right. Well, and
if I may jump in here, Ryan, and sorry to talk over you, but it's fascinating. I mean, I think before the show we were talking about the certificates in the background, and my wife was a chartered accountant, or CPA as we call it in the US, for many years before she. I think she got it right because she went and studied psychology. So she's a psychologist now. And it's funny because we started off this discussion with a monetary framing, but as we're chatting, it's actually more of a psychology framing, which is super interesting to me on the one hand. But I do want to tackle that. And what I want to tackle is, we talk about this 97%. We talk about where they're getting the information, and there's a big misinformation, let's call it gap here. The noise that is out there makes it incredibly difficult for the 97% to get access to the right kind of information. Okay. Now, as we've spoken about this, is first of all that they need to want to help themselves. Okay. But how do we change that? I mean, that's maybe the question we're trying to answer is how do we get the 97% to hear the right message when everything you see, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on mainstream news, whether it's lawyers, CPAs, whatever the messaging that's putting out there is, the 2% message is what's being amplified. So how do we change that? Is it podcasts like this? I mean, that I guess is part of the question. I mean, Mike, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, it's a really discouraging one too. I don't know how we overcome the financial incentive of the content creators in order to address this issue. Because to Ryan's point from earlier, if those folks are chasing that 2%, they're going to speak to that 2%. They're going to educate into that 2%. They're going to say things like, if you're a small business owner, make sure you understand how family offices work so that you can see them as a potential purchaser. It's a non-starter. It's a non-solution. But I read that, and again, let me talk a little bit about my embarrassing journey. I grew my business from 0 employees to 50 full-time. And in the last 2 or 3 years of that first decade, I focused exclusively on growing revenue because I had read an article that said companies in my industry were valued at 2 times revenue. Now, I thought I had done my homework, right? I had spent some time searching and learning, and only to find out at the end of that decade, after broker said, nope, can't help you, nope, can't help you, that this didn't impact my value, that's not how a business was valued. I worry about the well-intentioned, overworked business owner, the one who would genuinely like to learn about this stuff, but has a half an hour a month to give to it, or an hour a month to give to it. And I think, Ryan, if I'm hearing correctly, that's where our coaching practice offer comes in, right? It's, all right, let's carve this aside. We can target it for you specifically, but if they don't choose that or they don't want that, even if they just set aside 1 lunch hour a month to focus on doing that themselves, maybe over time they'll penetrate through some of that surface garbage and get to a place where they're learning about things like sellers' discretionary earnings and how are real businesses valued.
I like it a lot. And I resonate with that. The way that I would answer that, and I do want to come back. I put a note. Let's come back to that psychology versus the mechanics, because I think that's a fascinating topic too. But the way that Mike, we keep talking about, like, if everybody's marketing to the 2%, I still think that the way that those people are marketing to 2% is complete bullshit. Like, because it's the wrong words. They're using the words exit planning for the people that it doesn't apply to. And so how I'm trying to tackle this, Graham, is the only other analogy I can use, and it is, I'm going to relate it to healthcare. I personally believe this is a testimonial of one, that the United States healthcare system is a complete dumpster fire. I hate it so much from all of my personal experiences that the moment that I realized, out of pure exhaustion, that every doctor and healthcare provider is an insurance salesperson, is the moment that I had liberty to go, this is my responsibility. The only person that owns the outcome of whether I feel good or my family members feel good is us. Otherwise, my dad was wrongfully diagnosed by rheumatoid arthritis by the Mayo, and he was on Biotrax for 4 years, about effing killed him. My wife and her back. I could go on and on and on. And so then what did I do? Unfortunately, and this has been it's a skill set that is not for the faint of heart. I have consumed everything health-wise for 5-6 years. Huberman, everything I can listen to, Peter Attia, and I'm going to the people and I'm watching a 3-hour podcast on how mitochondria works, how dopamine works, how booze works. And I'm going, okay, and then coming up, guess what? I got to sleep 8 hours. I got to go work out and lift weights. I got to eat not fake food. And life is going to be generally okay. And then it was just everyone's fucking lying. And I was and what I realized, it's not, I want to be very careful because I went through, you guys, and I'll be very honest about this. I went through multiple phases with the business community like this, and then the healthcare, where resentment almost swallowed me up alive, and it doesn't do me any good. It's negative energy. It didn't do people that were listening to me any good. And it has been one hell of a personal growth journey to just be opportunistic in a system of complete horrible misalignment of incentives. And so I was just well, this sucks. I still go and I think there's relatable parts here. We've all probably been in a group meeting or a family or get together of friends, and you listen to people and I have this ailment, and then they talk about their lifestyle, and you're oh my God, you're a pharmacy, and this is probably why, but they think they're getting help. And I think about that in the business community. It's well, you got this exit planner who sells insurance. You got a CPA who's doing quality of earnings for 50 grand. Your assets under management, wealth managers trying to collect AUM so you sell your company. Your broker wants to sell your business, and you go all the way down. And it's it doesn't mean that the doctor or advisor is a bad person. They're trying to make their family and their ends meet. And it's I just realized that the system, which is why I figured out the macroeconomics. I'm so looping all the way back to your question, Graham, I believe the way that I can help impact the people that can't afford me or can't work with me right now is to provide free education through podcasts, through the newsletter, for YouTube videos. So that way they know Ryan doesn't care. I'm not trying to steal 40 grand for an insurance premium out of you. And without doing it in a gross way where I'm trying to sell against someone else, I'm just here's what it is. And then they can start through breadcrumbs. And then what I've been on a journey with Graham and Kyle and Mike would be interesting as we're all collaborating here is where do we get that content out when we're all content fatigued? And getting our voice out is even that harder. It's well, Vistage is a good group for me. Industry associations I'll keynote at. Then they are oh my God, Ryan might be worth listening to. Then they go listen to a podcast with Graham and Kyle. And it's it's really hard, but education to hopefully start changing that narrative, and education and messaging is the only thing that I've been able to land on.
Mike, what's your take? As I say, how do we change this narrative or kind of get this message out through all the noise?
Well, I'm gonna start by throwing a thank you to Graham and Kyle for reaching out for this conversation, right? Because I think the big problem is that the incentive isn't there for this messaging. And nobody makes a buck talking about the basics. And that's really what we're talking about, right? We're talking about core basics. Ryan, you earlier used the analogy to general health. And we all know that eat right and exercise is the core message of maintaining general health. Well, what's the eat right and exercise of small business sales, of business value? I know any of us can give each other a dozen highly technical, but what is it at the core? For me, it breaks down to the three questions. Are your results desirable? Can a buyer duplicate your results? And can you document your results? That leads us to my business buys itself, right? That's the core of this. And getting to a place where owners can answer yes to those three basic questions. If you can do that, if you can answer yes to those questions, then there's a line of advisors, to Ryan's point, who would be happy to list your business for sale or charge you 12 grand for the legal fees or do whatever. I can't help, Graham, but feel like the answer to your question is we just have to keep pounding. I'd love to say that the answer is a public program where there's some, but I'm skeptical that the answer is there. I think
Because
it's
you can
about,
think about who funds the associations. It's all the advisors. It's the same shit.
yeah, right. The sponsor for the event is unlikely to be, when it's an ESOP provider, is unlikely to be incentivized by someone like myself getting up and talking about how ridiculous it is that we know anything about ESOPs. I don't know. Is there a way
also
to,
like a clarification, like almost like, and maybe this is like something we could all do, is like put a qualification down, like who the hell is in the audience. And I think that's why we're here, right? It's like, I mean, me, Candace, and Luke, we're all like, if we're talking to sub $1 million, all of us should stop talking.
and that's the whole audience.
Well, not if they're listening to my channel, though.
Okay.
Do you see?
Fair.
Well,
which is why I asked the question in the webinar, right?
Yeah, no, which is why it was a great question.
To?
Yeah, yeah. And I think you know how I would answer. I like your couple isms that you gave out there, Mike. And like with the couple startups that I've had and or my bigger business, I think that there was one rule of thumb that treated me very well, that I accidentally did more good work. Like it's kind of back to like James Clear, what's your habit stacking that generally will lead to a good result? I hate doing things. I hate doing shit that I don't want to do. Right. Like I was told by the schooling system that was not good, which is why I got bad grades. And like, yet the hilarious part about this is the less shit you do in your business, the more it's worth. And so like, I was just like, wait a second. And that's why I love AI. Like every time there's a new technology, I'm like, I don't have to do this shit anymore. Like, how can I outsource all of the things that I don't want to do? Because if I want to get on a mountain and go skiing with my friends, and I was just in North Carolina last week with my wife, I don't want anybody talking to me. And like, it like the default mode of most of the people listening in, if they listen to that gut and said, if you're doing something twice, what the hell are you doing? And then the question is, how much does it cost to buy this situation away? And it might impact your cash flow, but like it's probably going to grow the value of your company.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if I can jump in there, Mike, and sorry for talking over you again, but I think the one thing that's quite apparent in this conversation, and is that's when we talk about this advice and the incentive gap. The incentives are completely misaligned in terms of advice into the business sector, right? The economics behind it don't make sense, but there are some universal truths. And I think one of the things we can all do to kind of amplify the message so that the right people hear it, and I try to break things down, is we need to simplify the messaging. I think one of the big issues with advisors, and we've all dealt with the sort of, Ivy League, blue chip advisors. I mean, some of us even come from the big four and the big five and all of those things, is everybody's trying to be the smartest person in the room. Okay. So we need to simplify things and forget about being the smartest person in the room. I think we need to recognize that, running and building a business is first and foremost, it's a human thing. Okay. It's not a numbers thing. It's a human thing. So it's about connecting with people as individuals. Okay. And yes, if you can do that on a one-to-many through a coaching program, you've got to get a business model that you can do that. I mean, we'd all love to chat to every single business owner one-on-one and, meet them where they're at. We know that that's not possible. And the third one is, I'm going to use it in a different context to what Ryan uses it, is independence. And I think independence is absolutely key. Like, why are you doing this? And that's the problem that you get with brokers and attorneys and lawyers. They're not independent. They're trying to give advice that they can get more work. We're all trying to make a living. How do you truly generate independent advice? And like you said, Mike, there's three things that matters. Can you make a cash profit? Can you repeat it? And is it documented? Those things seem almost too easy. But I'm emphasizing these points because I think when you take a step back, whether you are a sub-$1 million business or whether you a $50 million plus business, those universal truths still apply. Okay. How that message needs to get delivered, what have you, maybe is nuanced. But I think if we can agree on those universal truths, then it's a question of, well, how do we deliver that to more people so more people hear the message? Okay. So maybe as we come into close, we can spend a little bit of time just talking about so what are some of those universal truths? Okay. And how do we deliver, maybe how is that message delivered differently or the same to, and I'm using the word, loosely, smaller versus bigger businesses. And then, the second part is what are some of the things that we just need to be careful of? Where is there actually a divergence where, maybe that universal truth doesn't apply to a $60 million company that, what are the things that are different? And maybe we can spend the last sort of 5-10 more minutes talking about what's similar, what's different, and then kind of bring it into a close, if you guys are okay with that.
I like it.
Sounds good. Graham, I'm going to start by saying I don't care about the 2%. Those guys are getting taken care of, right? Those guys have the money to get the advisors that are going to walk them through this. Is that too harsh? I don't think so. They're going to take care of themselves. So for me, the question is, how do we help the 98%? And for me, it starts with them accepting and acknowledging that they should forget everything they've learned up to that point, because there's a pretty good chance that if it came from big business, that it's at least off target, if not completely out of left field. Learning that the journey that you're walking as a small business owner will probably be routine, but it won't be routine relative to the messaging and the storytelling that dominates the marketplace. Because how Google made its last acquisition doesn't apply to you. What private equity is doing doesn't matter. What matters, to your point, Graham, and those are my core questions. Are your results desirable? Not from a $20 million perspective, but if I'm a potential buyer and I'm looking at your business, am I going to go, I got to get me some of that, right? Does it give me a decent lifestyle as an owner financially? And does it give me freedom as an owner so that I can go to my kid's baseball game? Are the results actually desirable? Can they be repeated? Is it dependent on you as an owner? Do you have a team? Do you have systems, right? These are core things. We all have heard these in 14 different programs or methods, but what it breaks down to is, can a buyer duplicate your results? Because if they can't, I don't care how good they are. Your sale is meaningless, and so is sustainability, right? You want to own that thing, Ryan, to your observation? You want to own that thing without being involved? Well, if it's dependent on you, forget about it. Mm-hmm. And then again, last but not least is can you document it? And those are probably the saddest ones, because it's often a function of law. Technology-wise, that's something that is getting easier, right? Mm-hmm. I think that game has changed a little bit, and I think it's going to change a lot more in the next decade. But if you're not down with those basics, and let's just take the first one. If your business doesn't make a profit, if you are not paying yourself market rate salary and producing a profit that puts you in the average for your industry and relative business size, don't spend time on anything else until you figure that out. That's number one. Everything comes from that, because all I care about as a buyer when at the end of the day is, can I pay myself a reasonable salary so I can pay my mortgage? And can I service the debt that I incur to buy the business? If I can't do those two things, if your results don't make that happen, forget about it. We're having no conversation about exit. So those basics, they get buried under a sea of complexity, but that is what determines if an owner gets to go from step one to step two of exit, whether that exit is a sale or a stepping away.
Love it. So I will start with, I do agree with almost everything you said, except almost. The one thing that I do not agree with is that the people that are in the 2% are accurately taken care of. And I know that that's not where, and I respect the absolute hell out of you, Mike, for choosing your lane. And that's why I loved this entire conversation. Is I believe that 2% is myriad with a complexity that is just the same, and they don't know how this shit works either. And there's a higher chance that they're taking advantage of because they do have the money and it flows out their door without any actual meaningful progress. And then their timeline goes on and they're burnt out and back to going to the doctor for 4 years and not feeling any better. So where I chosen to spend my time is in that space to solve the same reasons that, things that you have, but where I spend a lot of my education is on the technical stuff so they can see how that stuff works to pick the appropriate material to consume and ignore the rest of the other shit. And I think, the thing that I would say that is a universal truth, and this is like where I've chosen to pick my side of the corner of the 2%, is I think exit planning for the 2% is a farce word phrase because you have a job and an asset that is commingled. And I believe anybody, and even when I had my own business from 0 to 7 figures, understanding that there are 2 roles that you are playing and you are literally not paying yourself for sweat equity because you want equity. Just understanding that I want out is not a good phrase because you're not articulating whether it's your job or your asset. I think just adding that one layer of thought process helps people then better answer what is it that I'm trying to solve for. And I think the reason that the 2% gets so screwed up with all this, because most of the people that I work with, you guys, Graham and Kyle, you guys are small giants fans. There are a lot of the 2%ers, right? So we're talking to the 2%ers and small giants. They're not gravitating towards private equity or strategic sales because like my dad and I had fired 60 out of my 90 employees. I wish I didn't do that because I didn't know what ESOPs work because no one told me about them. So I think it's important that how I've tried to solve that is by counteracting the exit planning vortex, as you put, Mike, to say this is ownership planning and capital allocation, and you have to make decisions. I think I've proven to myself is I'm attracting people that actually have the runway and the energy to do the hard stuff to get to the good outcomes because they have to reinvest their time and their capital to get the wealth, to create more options. And the reason that when I had this business called the Growth and Exit Planning Collaborative, now using all of our framework here, I was still targeting to the 2%, Mike, with a company called Growth and Exit Planning Collaborative with a $40,000 consulting arrangement. And I attracted 0 people because all the people that wanted to put lipstick on a pig and it was a shit business wanted to work with me, and there were all the turnarounds with horrible expectations, and all the people that had the time and the energy didn't want to work with me because it's an exit. And I was like, I've engineered a business no one wants to work with. This is so awesome for me. And there was a lot of things that I wish I would have learned about this podcast years ago to save myself that pain. But that ownership versus operator ownership framework seems to be words that are resonating with people that have time and energy to make their meaningful step up from where they're at. And I think what Kyle and Graham, I'm very excited about the partnership and the collaboration here is, I think whether you're a $100 company or $100 million company, it's insane to not understand how valuations work if you chose to be a business owner. So we started everybody hopefully with a good breadcrumb here, which is decouple yourself, put systems in place, but start thinking about that, whether you want to sell or not, because you're choosing to be a private equity owner regardless of whether you've said those words or not. Kyle and Graham, I want to flip the scripts and be like, what the hell did you two think about this conversation? I think if we hit, end before getting to know what you guys think about this stuff. And I know you've got a lot of partners that you're working with, so you can dance around whatever you need to, but full disclosure for Graham and Kyle, they're not agreeing upon anything that Mike and I said here. They've been good moderators, but what do you guys think about what the hell we've been talking about?
So I'm gonna let Kyle go first, and then I'll
that would have cop out.
wrap up and then bring things to a close. But Kyle, you go first.
No, I mean, I think what's really important is, there's synergies in both sides of these things. I mean, we've kind of figured out cash flow is important, understanding your goals, understanding that there's a system that is pretty much engineered to work against you. And it's when you break out of the matrix and figure that out, which is going to take doing hard work on your own, consuming, as Ryan said, hours and hours of podcasts, maybe getting called crazy by some people. That's actually going to be the most beneficial thing you can do. I think just in general, this is a great conversation and a necessary conversation. And I mean, just one other thing, you've got a truth. I mean, speak it. I think in this world, especially, the reason why we're hearing the same things over and over again is everybody is jumping on bandwagons and just, too afraid to be called out for being wrong, which is not a problem if you're wrong. Just acknowledge when you're wrong and move on and then course correct. And it's probably actually even more beneficial to then come out and say, hey, I was wrong, but this is what I learned, which I've heard from both of you on this conversation. I think people respect that, and you become a lot more trustworthy when you do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think to add to what Kyle's saying, for me, I mean, I think this is a fascinating discussion. I think we need to have more of these kind of conversations. I think there's a few things that I kind of want to highlight. One is it's important to understand, where do you sit? Okay. Are you in the 98%? Are you in the 2%? Are you between the 90? Ryan, I think, are you between like the 95 and the 99%? Okay. Because that's the first thing. As a business owner listening to this, you need to recognize where you fit in that spectrum. I'll use an analogy. I mean, Kyle, for those of you who might know, was an elite level swimmer, nearly made it to the Olympics, but got injured before final trials. Now, I'll use swimming as an analogy. If you want to be an elite level swimmer, you need to train in a particular way. Okay. And believe you me, that's doing 8 kilometers a day, or 6 miles a day in the pool, 3 times a day, and what have you. But if you just want to be able to go paddle in the Bahamas and do a bit of snorkeling, that's a very different outcome. So understanding where do you sit is important. Number 2, one is not better or worse than the other. Whether you're a big business or whether you are a smaller turnover business, okay, it's not better or worse. It's about a choice. Sometimes it's not a choice. Sometimes you go into business because of survival instinct. Okay. But no one is better or worse than the other. And I think we've got to stop believing this lie that, you got to have an 8 or 9 or 10 figure exit to have been successful. So I think it's important to think independently and not just, and be happy to kind of, break away from, the norm. I mean, I love Roosevelt's speech. It says, not the critic that counts. It's the man who's in the arena whose face is, marred by blood, sweat, and tears. I'm paraphrasing. So I think that's a big takeout from me. And I think it's also important that we can have divergent opinions. And actually, as we're having this discussion, I thought, Ryan, you in the blue corner, and Mike, you in the red corner. Sorry, I'm not talking about your political affiliations. Right? I'm talking about the boxing ring.
Green and yellow. There you go.
You see, I wore a shirt today with blue, white, and red, so I'm safe. But the point is actually the big takeout from me is there's actually so much commonality in what you're saying. Sometimes the words and how those are directed towards a particular audience, okay, make it feel as though the one side doesn't actually belong or there's a misalignment. But when we cut through all of that today, I think there's a hell of a lot of alignment. It's just around nuances and focus. So for me, that's been a key take out from today, and I think we need to have more of these conversations. We need to be talking to more business owners. We need to be talking to more Carls. We need to be giving more of a platform to to guys across the spectrum, not just the Elons or the billionaires. So I think that's incumbent on us. If each one of us, or each person who listens to this podcast, just shares this with one other person who might benefit from that, that can have an impact. And their communities like Small Giants. Shout out to someone like. They got acquired, Alexis and her team, sharing stories of, let's call it founders across the spectrum. So I think, I'm waffling on now, but for me, that's been the key take. I love these conversations. I love bringing, people together. I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration and to speak truth and not nonsense. I mean, I think that's super important. I mean, maybe to wrap things up, I think I kind of maybe want to leave Ryan, you and Mike with a final word. And I'm going to flip the script over here. Okay. So because we started off with Ryan, you saying that you advocating for, let's call it the 2%, and Mike, you advocating for the 98%. I want to kind of ask you, Mike, if there's one piece of advice that you could give to a business owner who's in the 2% listening to this, what would that be? And Ryan, if there's one piece of advice that you could give to a business owner who's in the 98% in inverted commas, like what would that be? And then, we can bring things to a close.
I love it.
My immediate Graham, the immediate response that came to mind, if I were speaking to that 2% audience, I would encourage them to live in gratitude. Because the reality that they're experiencing while they have problems and challenges, come on back down to the lower end of the 98% if you want to see problems and challenges and life impact. Many of us who are lucky enough to have experienced some degree of success, we can forget that. And I think everybody on the call here has had the opportunity to crawl through that space, and I would speak to that audience that way.
I love that. It's just that gratitude and humility, and to not lose sight of that. It's love that, Mike. Ryan, I'll give you the closing word.
I would say that because I'll just speak to myself 5 years ago, because I was that person. Is doing the hard work to understand the goals and what level of hard crap I'm willing to deal with to get to those goals, and quantifying them. I'm just speaking to myself, would have allowed me to make better decisions about what I'm willing to do for what reward. And I believe that all of us are, if you're still listening in, we're all willing to do hard work. I think we all just want to know, is it worth it or not? And so understanding, is it worth it, needs to be really unpacked. Understanding how certain things work, how valuations work, what's the path need to be in order for me to get to that outcome. Because the thing that I want for anybody is like, God, there's nothing worse where you get to that point where you're just like, I don't know if this is all worth it or not. I have no idea what it's worth. I'm just burnt out as shit. I don't want to be here anymore. Everybody relies on me. My family relies on me. My employees rely on me. And that horrible abyss, do the thinking before then. Because then you'll know why you're doing everything. And, hard work is part of the life journey, but it provides meaning to that hard work because the why is very clear.
Absolutely love that. And that's just kind of reinforcing the point Mike, I think, made right at the beginning. It starts with, spending 4 or 5 months getting to know that 98% business owner and their why before you even go further. So I appreciate that, Ryan. Carl, any last words from you, and then I'll wrap up.
Don't know if I could top those. So I think we good to wrap.
Listen, to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Those of you who've sat through the full sort of 2 hours, you've got stamina, but hopefully, I think this conversation is one that we need to have more of. to Ryan and to Mike, I just want to express a massive thanks to the both of you. I think like all of us in the room here, we're passionate about what we do. And I think that passion shines through in sort of strong views, strong opinions, willing to take the time to come and share this platform and have this debate and have this discussion. So to the both of you, really appreciate it. And thank you for your support, and thank you for your partnership. So with that, thanks everyone.
I'll do last plug for the listeners here. Check out BizVal, because it's the best valuation tool that I've come across, and I've come across a lot. It's the only reason I'm here with these guys. So back to like, where am I right now? I think it's a very easy hurdle to overcome with your guys' platform. So thank you, Kyle and Graham, for all the stuff that you guys have been doing.
Agreed.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ryan.